Hey there Python pioneers, and welcome to another video. In this video we're going to be talking about functions in Python. At a high level, functions allow you to define code once and run it over and over again. Kind of like a while loop, right? Like you can run your code over and over again, but in this case you can do it anywhere in your program. So anytime you wanted to do a specific task, you could just call your function. And some of the functions that we've been using this whole time include, the string function, the float function, integer, all of those for converting types, the len function for length, printing with print, the input function for getting input from the keyboard, the range function for generating a range. So those are all functions you've already been using. What we want to learn about today is how to create your own functions. So let's start. I'm going to write out a very simple function to begin with, and we'll talk about some of the pieces. Then we'll dive into a little bit more nuance, and that'll be it. So first off, let's say we want to print hello world 5 times. We type out hello world, and normally you would have to copy this and type it out 5 times. If we run that code, it prints out hello world 5 times. Now here's the problem. Let's say I decide, oh man, I need to capitalize the H in hello. I've got to go fix it 5 times, right? If I want to change what I said, I have to go change every line, and that can get very cumbersome, especially if you're going across a larger program that has the function call not back to back like this. Maybe it's used in multiple different places, so it becomes kind of cumbersome. So let's define a function to print hello world. All you have to do, just like with the while loop, the for loop, if statements, you type out your keyword, which in this case is def. For define, this is going to be the definition of our function. So what is our function going to do? Well, first we have to give it a name. So always make your function names useful, and not useful, but make it where when you read your function name, you know what the function does. The idea is you don't want to have to go read your function to figure out what it does. So print, for example, it's going to print to the screen. str, you know that it's going to convert a value to a string. So let's create one for us, and we're going to create one called print hello world. Okay? And we have to give it the function parentheses, right? And then a colon. Press enter and type out print hello world. And that is all. We now have a function for printing hello world. To use the function, we have to call it. So you've been calling functions this whole time, and you probably have heard me even say calling a function. But calling a function is literally just typing out the function name and providing any parameters it might have, which we're about to talk about. This function does not have parameters, so we're not worried about that. And we just type print hello world, and we're going to do that 5 times. Now, if I ever need to change what this function does, I change it in one place instead of 5. So if I run that, it prints hello world 5 times. But if I want to add an exclamation point, it's already done for all 5 times. Pretty simple version. So this is a function that doesn't have any parameters. So for example, print, you pass in what you want to print as a parameter. You pass it in as an argument. And arguments are the values for arguments are used in the parameters. So I can kind of show you the difference. So let's create a different function for adding 2 numbers, just to show you what that looks like. So we're going to create one called def add nums. And let's just call it add. and we're going to have two parameters that we take, A and B. We could use any names we want. These are variable names that we're making up on the spot. Give it a colon. Separate those parameter names with a comma, and now we could use the values that are going to be passed in by the user. So we can literally just say, result equals A plus B, return result. You actually could just return A plus B, but I want to show you something else in a second. So what do we write out? We've got a variable we created called result that is equal or set to A plus B, the values that are going to be passed in as arguments when we call this function. So then we return the result, and all that does is when we call the function, the value that we want to give back to the user or to the program that where it was called, that is what is returned. So think about when you call the string function, right? You pass in maybe the number 42. The string function will return the string representation of 42. The length function or len, maybe you pass in a string, right? And it has 5 characters. The length function returns 5 as an integer. So we're going to return the result of A plus B. And to call our function, we're just going to print out the result here, and we're going to say add 5 plus 4. So we expect that it should print the number 9, right? And what error did I get? Missing one. Oh, I put a plus. That's my bad. Comma. We want to return 5 plus 4, and that's what's going to happen when we pass into this function. We get 9. Okay, so when we call the function, the values we pass it are technically called arguments, but the arguments are just passed in for the parameters, right? It's just keywords that we're using here, but so it's useful to understand what the different words mean when you're reading the book and talking with other professionals. They'll use these words frequently. So this function is pretty simple. You might be thinking, why don't we just add 5 plus 4? That's just, I'm just showing you a simple example. And functions get much larger and much more complex. So another thing to point out, we have this variable called result that's defined inside of the add function. If I try to print out result down here, we're going to get an error. It doesn't know what result is. Result is not defined. That is because inside of a function, any variables you define, they cease to exist once the function stops running. So you can't access them outside of the function. Now here's a weird caveat. If I define a function, or if I define a variable down here and I say my global var, and we'll set it equal to 10. If I'm inside of this function and I say print my global var, let's see what happens. It printed 10, right? But let's see what happens if so it got the value, right? It got the value out of the global variable. And the global variable is just a variable that's defined outside of all functions. So that's the global scope. We're going to learn more about that in subsequent videos to follow this one very soon. But just briefly, global scope is when you write code outside of any functions. So this would be a global variable. It's accessible inside of all functions. So if I print my global var, it's going to print 10 here. But what happens inside of this function if I try to say my global var equals 5? Do you think it's going to change the value of my global var, or do you think it'll stay the same? Okay, let's run it and see. Interesting, right? So it's still printed 10, and let's not print the value of add so that we're not getting confused by the two numbers. So we call add, and when inside of the add function, when the function is called, it just hops up to where the function is defined, runs the code with the arguments that were passed. So we passed in 5 and 4, so result equals 5 plus 4. My global var equals 5, which you would think changes this to equal 5. And then we return the result, a plus b. But for some reason, when we print my global var, it's still set to 10. That's because in Python, you can't change the global variable without using a special word called global. What's actually happening right now is that Python defined a new variable inside of the function called myGlobalVar, which is a little confusing, right? So like I said, the variables that are defined inside of a function cease to exist when the function is done running, okay? And you can have variable names that are the same inside of a function. So I can have my global var defined here, and I can have it defined here. And when I'm in my function, it'll just use the new version that I defined. I could even actually set the parameter name instead of a. I could call it my global var, and that would work just fine for using the value inside of the function. Where you run into trouble is when you think that changing the value here inside of a function is going to change the global variable. It won't. The way that you have to do that actually is by typing out global. So now Python knows that you're talking about the myGlobalVar that's defined in the global scope. And now if I set myGlobalVar equal to 5, then when we run this code, it actually changed the variable here. Now I showed you this because the book talks about it and I wanted to talk about it as well, but don't do this. Don't use global variables. It's very confusing. And honestly, what it's going to end up doing is you're going to have a variable like that's not called myGlobalVar. It's going to be called something much more useful. And it's going to get changed. The value is going to change by some random function, and you're not going to really know what changed it. And it gets really hard to debug. So don't do that. What we're actually going to end up doing is, and we'll dive more into this, how you write this out later, but we're going to write out def main. So every program, a lot of programming languages have a main function. And basically what we're going to do is put everything inside of a function. So you won't have any code in that global scope I was talking about. And I'll show you this when we talk about scope in detail. But the idea is then I call my main function. And now there's no global scope. So this code will do the same thing. You know, it will run. It will call. So if we get rid of this test here and we print the add, right, we're going to have the same result that we had when we were first testing. 9, right? Oh, there we go. So we have 9. But this is really nice. Now I know nothing can change my global var, which is no longer global var because it's defined inside of a function. So if I come over here and I try to type, you know, global my global var and then say my global var equals 5, and then down here we try to print my global var, this won't change. Okay, and we're still printing the add, so I'll just comment that out. Well, actually I can't comment it out because then that function won't get called, but I won't print the value that it returns. And notice that my global var is still 10. So there is no global my global var, or well, there is this variable is not a global variable anymore, so it can't be changed by another function using the global like this, which is good, right? That's what we're talking about. It's good because now I know the only thing that could possibly change this function has to, or this variable had to happen in this function call. So I can read through the code and see what happened. But we'll talk more about how to write that out. There's a better way to write it instead of just calling main. But that is the idea. Okay, so we talked about defining a function, calling a function, passing arguments to functions, parameters, which are just a, b, whatever you want to use as a variable, and the return statement, what it looks like when you return a value. I guess one thing to mention, you could type return multiple times. So you could have a if statement that says if, result is greater than 10, then return result. And then you could say like else return result minus 5 or something, right? And so you have different returns. You can have return as many times as you want. You just want to make sure that your function always returns something. Your function has to return something. And we're actually in the next video going to learn about none, which I guess you could say is something but also nothing. So we'll jump over and we'll talk about that next. Thank you.